The Brothers Wisp. The Brothers Wisp, Brothers Wisp. The Brothers Wisp. The Brothers.
You're now listening to Greg. It's
Hey
the
everybody,
Brothers
this
Wisp.
is
Let's
Greg
take a
with the
ride
Brothers
with
Wisp
Splice
number
Points.
83. It is, what, February 16th? We just had Valentine's Day. You guys, you feeling like you're in the mood? You feeling romantic? What did you, I'll give you the quick version for what I did for Valentine's Day.
Christy had the same thing.
So Saturday, not today, but last Saturday at 6 a.m. I woke up like in excruciating pain. We went to the emergency room. Turns out I have kidney stones.
Oh.
Or I did. And so I basically slept until Tuesday when my meds ran out. And so I had to go back up there to get more. And they checked me out and they're like, your kidneys are struggling. So they like put me in the hospital immediately. And then Wednesday I had surgery. They went in there and blasted them. So I've just been like just dying. It still hurts a lot. I'm still peeing a lot of blood. But it's supposed to be getting better. So I'm about a week out of it starting. And what was it? Wednesday afternoon, like at 5 was when they did the surgery. They shot a laser up my penis, which is pretty baller.
Why do we need to know that? Why? It's totally unnecessary. I don't want to think about your penis or a laser.
Well, just think about it. It just kind of blows me away, the medical advance. Oh, and they did like a CAT scan on me, which is so cool because it like does the slices of your body.
64 slices of your penis.
It's crazy to think that we've evolved to the point where they can stick a camera and a laser into your body and blast stuff. It's pretty bananas. So I haven't shaved in a week. Obviously I've bathed and brushed my teeth. I've done that much at least. But I've kind of lost the whole week. So this is going to be me playing catch up as well. So Valentine's Day, I basically slept on the couch. That was and then the 15th yesterday was my wedding anniversary. And we went and got ice cream. So it's been an eventful week for me.
Okay, I think the rest of us don't have to tell any stories anymore. We can't beat that. I think that's all we needed.
Yeah, that's pretty bananas. I don't know. I'm not one of those people that goes on social media and like posts pictures of them in the hospital and stuff like that. Not that I'm knocking those people. I'm not that guy. I'd rather just do the thing, and then when I'm on the other side of it, then I'll say, hey, yeah, I just did this thing. I don't want to tell anybody while I'm in it.
Yeah, I hear that.
Anyway, let's get started, everybody.
Sure.
Today we've got myself, Greg Soul, from Texas. Over there, we've got Dave from LA. Was that Louisiana? That's where you're from, right?
Los Angeles, California.
Oh, beautiful. Down below, you've got Mikey from Chicagoland.
Hey.
And then you've got this cool avatar image right there of Thomas Kernack. Where are you from, Thomas?
Somewhere in Middle Europe.
Oh, okay. He's from Ireland. You can tell by the accent, obviously. Slovakian. He's already Slovakian. Excellent. Well, let's do the thing. We've got some new patrons. So for everybody who has ever listened to this, because I beat the heck out of this horse, is we have a patron. It's patreon.com/TheBrothersWISP. You jump in there, you throw some cash, you get access to a Brothers Wisp only Slack. So a lot of good discourse in there. We have a few new patrons in there. So this is always the interesting part where I guess people's name. We have Dominic Rabinault. We have Ty Featherling. He's an old schooler. Bill Ellis, Anthony Magliari, and Donald Long. We actually picked up a few this week. So thank you guys for the support.
And I'm pretty sure that Dominic, he's not too far from you. I think he's involved with Rock Solid. I think they're over in the Austin, San Antonio area.
Oh, baller. That's not too bad. Austin's like an hour and a half. San Antonio's like 3.5 hours. So that is pretty close.
Considering that, it's what, like 12 hours to get from you to the edge of the other edge of Texas. Yeah, 1.5 is.
Yeah, it takes a while. Decent. And Dominic sent me his list of 5 tips. I just sort of lost this whole week, so I need to circle back with him and get those recorded. So that'll be cool.
So the new guy's already doing better than I am.
He sent us the tips before he was a patron, so there you go. He kind of did them both at the same time. Let's see. We also have Pennytone again coming around as a sponsor, the official sponsor. It's the easy button for delivering VoIP services to your business customers. They provide all the features you expect with the reliability and care you deserve. So again, you're still running this month's specials. So if you want to get SIP trunks from Dave, he's doing it at about 0.0015 cents a minute and 0.0112 cents a minute for toll free. Terms and conditions apply. Call 855-Pennytone to sign up. Also, you have an email address, don't you, Dave?
Sure. David@pennytone.com.
Awesome. So what's the process like? I mean, how long are we taking? We negotiate, we sign some paperwork, and then how long before we can get that SIP trunk set up?
Well, if they're going to be doing outbound, literally in just a few minutes. But if we're porting numbers, that could take anywhere from a week to 2 weeks, depending on the losing carrier's cooperation. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, yeah, we have to sign an LOA, a letter of authority, that gives me the authority to port numbers on the customer's behalf. That starts the process. Once both carriers accept the LOA and agree on a porting date, we just wait for the porting date. And again, that's for inbound. Outbound can start immediately. So, yeah, it's pretty much that easy.
That's baller, man.
Yeah.
I like the sound of that. And your prices are much better than anything I've seen just going online and looking at people who will throw you SIP trunks, whether they're kind of small resellers or the big boys. That's a better price than I've seen from virtually any of them. So.
Yeah, and actually the reason why I'm giving such a low price is because the more minutes I pass, the more negotiating power I have with my carriers to get me better pricing. So it'll eventually just end up benefiting everyone. So there we go.
I'll get along to go along. All right. So while we've got him, which we almost never do, I wanted to see if Thomas was interested in giving us some Unimus updates since the last time he talked to us, which would that have been like a couple of months, Thomas, maybe?
I think so, yeah.
All right. So you haven't made any changes or updates since then, right?
I'm pretty sure we have, although the question is how many of them, since I don't actually remember when was the last time I was on here, so...
Well, just give us the highlights that you've done recently.
So I think we had like 2 major updates or releases since I last time was on here, which would be the 1.8 chain and then the 1.9.0 chain, which is the current release, and like they're, both of those being major version releases have quite a few things. I suppose if you just want like a real fast, what's new thing, then well, we have actual configuration change notifications with graphical diffs in emails. That has been like since 1.8.0, which has been in June, and I suppose I have been on here since June, right?
Maybe.
Yeah, that's
it's hard to keep track, honestly.
You're not even really here. You're only half here. We can't even see your face. All we see is this icon of you.
See, even when I do come, it's just not yeah. Anyway, but like the main release, which was actually in January, so last month was 1.9.0, which was our biggest release ever so far. And that one mostly revolved around security, so better user limitation system. So even previously in Unimus, you could say, this group of devices only this user can see it, this group of devices only another user can see it. And of course, this is meant, when you have some junior admins, you don't want junior admins to see the configuration of your core firewalls or, BGP routers. That's or for an enterprise in your VPN access concentrators, that's not very secure. So that was already in Unimus before, but basically we improved it even more, made it easier to work with, and going with the security, we added like a highly sensitive passwords feature into Unimus. So now if you put passwords into Unimus, you can mark a password to never again be displayable in Unimus. So you just put it there once, and nobody can ever retrieve it. Which again, it's keeping in mind with the security team. And basically device tags were completely written from scratch. It's a long changelog.
That's cool. So for those listening that don't know what Unimus is, it's a backup system that will pull all of your kit together. You're always adding new stuff. I was curious, what's something that you guys back up that people maybe wouldn't expect you to be able to?
We actually have some SIP gateways and some SIP ATAs, so we do have a bunch of SIP support as well. The list is big. I mean, at this point we support like 120 different vendors / device types / equipment
That's awesome.
models.
And
So,
I've noticed before people say, hey, do you guys support this or that? And your usual answer is, well, if you can get me access to one of them, we will. So that's pretty awesome. So it's almost, I mean, what are the requirements? You have to have kind of a external access to the thing, right? You have to be able to SSH into this Joker.
We basically have two ways how to add support. This might be interesting to people, so I can talk about this. We basically, how Unimus works internally is when we write drivers. So as you can imagine, each device has a different CLI, right? And it behaves differently. Some paginate output, the more, or press space to more, press any key to output more. Some don't. Of course, there is many other things to actually properly talking over a terminal with the device. But the point is that what we do in Unimus is we simulate every single device. We actually write a simulator for every single device that we add support for. And this is because going into the future, when we change our logic of talking to devices, or we change some of our internal framework, which handles device communication, we don't want to break support for existing devices, right? Since we support more than 120 different device vendor types, models, however you want to call it, we obviously don't have like every single piece of equipment on site, especially talking about some of the more unusual stuff that we support. We have support for some HP blade system chassis, like the blade system network controllers, the blade system storage controllers. We also have some the MSA storage array controllers and whatever else. So those are obviously big, enterprise expensive things. And so when we change anything in the code, we don't want to break support for the existing devices. So part of adding support for a new device, tying it back into that, is that we write a simulator that is able to internally simulate that device for us, and then we run tests against the simulated device to see if anytime we make changes, if we don't break communication with existing supported devices. So how that works is that basically if we want to add support for a new device, the first thing we do is we write the simulator, right? So we don't have to rely on the user giving us access to the device for a longer period of time. And so how we can write that simulator, because we develop against that simulator then, is either the user gives us access through SSH to a device, which easier for us because we actually have access to the device. But obviously, sometimes that's possible, and other times it's not for obvious reasons, right? And even if we don't actually want access to like production-grade equipment of somebody else's network, that's we don't even want that. So option one is we get SSH to a device, and option two is we actually do a WebEx session with the person who requests the support, and they do SSH captures of communication with that device. So we just tell them, log into the device, switch into privilege exec, switch into configure mode, do a show running config, do some other commands, and all the while you do SSH capture of the entire discussion and communication with the device, and then they just send us that SSH capture file, and out of that SSH capture file we write the simulator. So we either write the simulator by having access to the device directly, or we write the simulator from SSH capture files.
That's cool. And so is the simulator something you guys wrote in-house, or is that kind of an off-the-shelf?
Yeah, that's completely in-house.
That's baller, dude. That's cool. So you just look at how it presents all the information, all the interactions you have to have, and then you throw it into the simulator and you say, this is an XYZ piece of equipment now.
It's a part of it. In reality, it's a bit more complicated because of how terminal emulation works, right? Because in reality, when you connect over SSH, you connect to a terminal, right? To a command line interface. And each terminal uses some kind of terminal emulation. Usually that's Xterm or VT100. and each device uses different terminal emulation, uses different VT100 control sequences, etc., etc. So at the base level, it's what you described, but it's a little bit more complicated.
Far more
because
complex.
if you want to like fully simulate how the device behaves, you have to understand the actual terminal emulation that the device does and how it handles.
Did you ever think that maybe there's a market for that? So as you build these simulators, you could make them available?
We actually, that's one of the things we are considering. Like, the simulators are nowhere near, as complex as a real device. You can,
Right.
we only simulate what we care about. Right now.
You're not going to be moving packets through this thing or anything.
No,
like
no, of course not. It's just you simulate the CLI of that particular device, which could be useful for like training purposes and just learning purposes. But so we have actually talked if this would be useful to someone to offer it either as a service or even open source it, but we haven't come to any like particular outcome of this. Like, I think I once mentioned that we do load testing as well against this, because if you think about it, we now have the ability to simulate SSH of a device, right? And for us, again, this might be only a thing that's interesting for us for Unimus, but if somebody else is interested, let me know. We basically have the ability to like spin 20,000 SSH servers on one server. And each of those SSH servers is running on a separate port and presents a different simulated device. So you could connect to a server on port 1000, and it's a Cisco. You connect to a port 1001, and it's a Mikrotik, etc., etc.
That's cool.
The point is, when you want to test the software in scale, it's very difficult to, or even impossible to, test how a software behaves with 20,000 devices without having them. Which, amazingly enough, we actually have networks which run Unimus against devices with tens of thousands of devices.
That's awesome.
So we need to do the scale testing, and so we utilize this simulator to like simulate 15,000 devices on one server. And if you think about the numbers, it was quite a task to optimize it enough so you are even able to run 15,000 SSH servers on a single server. Because if you think 15,000, if you just do 1 megabyte of memory per SSH server, you are at 15 gigs of memory utilization. And so that was a fun project. And it's interesting to me. I don't know if I'm blabbering about stuff that's too,
No, it's interesting to me. Because at first I was starting to think, well, if you have that many clients, do you simulate variances and latency that they'll respond? But I guess if you're spinning up that many backup processes, well, I mean, I guess you're not doing it all. You're not doing 20,000 simultaneously, right?
So how Unimus works is there is a threat pool. And it's a dynamic threat pool. So what that means for people who don't understand what the threat pool is, it's a certain number of concurrent outbound sessions. So by default, Unimus uses 100. So it does 100 concurrent outbound sessions, and it's like a queue basically. As soon as one finishes, another one is picked into the queue, and up to 100 concurrent sessions, it will just work through the entire queue of queued up processes. And this is not just for backup, because of course Unimus at this point does many more things than just backup, but basically everything is queued, and then there is like a worker thread pool which picks jobs out of the queue and processes them up to 100 concurrently.
That's bananas, dude. All right. So we went down a rabbit hole pretty far there.
Oh yeah,
that's a fascinating.
You should have stopped me sooner.
I have this incessant need to understand how everything works and why it works the way it does. So I tend to ask people too many questions. But yeah, that's awesome, man. I'm glad to see you guys are making updates, and that's I just love the internals of that stuff. How It's Made is probably my favorite show on like actual television. I just love watching how they build all these things.
It's a nice show.
So let's keep trucking. Mike, you had this on the list ages ago.
Well, on the Unimus tangent.
Oh, okay.
Thomas, do you ever get people that make complicated feature requests?
Yes.
Hi, Mike.
You mean outside of you, Mike? So you're getting that?
I was gonna kind of play it by ear, see what he said.
Is it just me, or can I only see the top of Mike's head?
That's the only part worth seeing. Don't worry about it.
Hey, he's got new glasses. Finally. Hey, put it back on your face. Come on.
Yikes.
Good.
All right,
yeah,
Mikey.
Hammett, didn't you ask for some like wild requests, like you want different colored outputs for differences in files in Slack?
Well, so I've had a couple requests that I've made of Unimus that at first he's like, that's going to be tough. We're not going to do that. Or at least not anytime soon.
Well, if you're the only person asking for it,
Yeah.
guess what? It's not going to happen.
But, well, and so one of them was on I think on the TheBrothersWISP Facebook page. I said, why can't vendors make, how hard is it to make a dark theme for every use, like for everything? Like, does it take an hour, 2 hours? Thomas, how long has your guy been working on that so far?
10 days.
Hey, maybe you need to hire Hammett because he knows a way to do it in 2 hours.
And if I remember correctly, Thomas knew it was going to take a lot of time, and somehow one of his guys got wind of it and said, "No, I want to do that."
Yeah, how it went internally is because you asked that question, and I actually replied on Facebook. It's nowhere near 1 or 2 hours. It's more like 5 man days. 5 days of work. Wow. And Mike was, why? What is so hard about this? So, we actually talked about this here in the office internally, and I wrote an entire list for Mike of, why does it take 5 days just to add like a dark theme, right? Yeah. Well, it helps everybody to understand what's actually involved in something like that, and somehow it just happened. And since we talked about this in office, one other of our developers just said, "Yeah, I like this. I'm gonna do this." So I basically, that spiraled into an entire implemented feature that's now actually implemented.
I think you should actually just name that feature the Hammett background.
The Mike
That's
theme.
it.
Yeah.
The Hammett theme.
The Hammett theme. Okay. Yeah, we can do that.
It just keeps annoying you until you submit.
That's funny. That runs in any project you think. If you think it's going to take X amount of time, go ahead and double that, just to be safe.
Well, and then I have given him many smaller feature requests that have been, accommodated gracefully. But then as Dave alludes to, I asked him the other day, why can't we get device changelogs in Slack? And the reason was that Slack API doesn't support the coloring, that the Unimus engine uses.
It's not just the coloring. Slack API is actually so bare bones. You have no options to format what you send to it. It can't accept just normal HTML formatted, content. The only thing you can do is pretty much the Slack version of Markdown, which they use. But that doesn't support coloring. It doesn't support even putting larger amounts of data into Slack is very painful as well. Let's say you have 100 lines of changes, which means that it's realistically 200 lines because the before change and after change, and there's just Slack isn't meant for that, right? It's like a chat messaging service, basically, collaboration messaging service. And their API is very lacking in any way to post any serious content into Slack. So,
Mike, why don't you write a front end that connects to Unimus and download all the info that you need, and then just display it in the colors that you need?
Because I'd rather just sit here and armchair
complain about
Tomas
it. Yeah. Why not just use the email functionality built in and have it go to a different folder or something?
But and
email address.
I mean, usually when I ask it, and if he says it's hard, I just kind of give up unless I think of some other, what if you did this? And I did that. And the other day he's like, well, somebody actually got an idea, so we're going to talk about it.
Well, you know what I like too is it's never just a hard no from Thomas. Even if he thinks it's not feasible, he'll take the time to tell you why it's not necessarily feasible right now. So
yeah, that's pretty cool.
I like that.
That is pretty awesome, Thomas. You get kudos for that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I hate it when, that's your vendor is just some big black hole and anything you throw in there, just nothing comes back out. You get no information. Are we good with Unimus? I don't want to.
I have a question about Unimus. How the hell did you come up with that name? Does that mean something in Slovak?
So this is actually, I have to give credit. I think it was Alex.
I think it was
right?
Alex, yeah.
I think it was Alex. So originally the name for Unimus, funnily enough, was supposed to be UNMS. And this was before Ubiquiti's UNMS ever existed, because we started developing on the Unimus, 5 years ago, before Ubiquiti ever did anything. But the point was, it was supposed to be like a universal network management system, UNMS, right? Mm-hmm. But we didn't like how that was pronounced. It's like very hard, very doesn't just roll, like UNMS. So I asked in our brothers Slack, do you guys have any suggestions, or do you have like what can we do with this? And I think actually it was Alex who suggested the UNMS, right? A UNMS thing. And we said, we don't like that. That's too hard to pronounce. So we just made the UNMS into Unimus. Just put some, vowels in the middle of it to make it easier to pronounce, and it became Unimus.
Quick code change. Awesome. Good.
I don't know. The project can't start until you have a name for it sometimes.
So the original horrible name for it was Becker. Like, just back up everything and Becker, but we didn't like that because...
sounds chintzy.
Yeah, it doesn't sound good, and it implies on the backup too much, which at this point, backup is like the minor feature of Unimus, right? The rest of the features are more important than just being able to back up your equipment.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. So, Mikey, you've had this thing in here for the last 3 casts, and you haven't been on to talk about it. It says new weekly features, and vendor feature request reminder. What is this? Let's get rid of this. Let's throw it in the trash. What is it?
Well, no, see, by weekly feature, I mean I want it to come up every week. Basically, just a reminder for everybody to go to their vendors' feature request systems, look through things that are already there, add support for things you like. And if you anything that you want, put in a feature request for things you want, and better if you could provide, more than just one sentence as to what you want.
Could you post a link to those websites? I typically never look at feature requests. I feel like they just get ignored, so I don't even bother posting them. But if you have a website, or the links to the websites that actually show what people are requesting, that'd be great.
Yeah, we could probably come up with something, some sort of list.
Yeah, maybe put it in a doc or something that we can just keep adding to as we go. Excellent. All right, Mikey. Big boy switches. What's the story on this? You're looking for stuff with what? QSFP plus?
Well, and so what I mean by big boy switches is just stuff that WISPs don't normally use. And what I'm looking for is what platforms out there have some sort of unique functionality. What makes that platform special? Cisco's uniqueness is just that they're everywhere and they will slowly eat away at you and eventually you will die. That's not what I actually mean.
I don't think that's unique. I think that's the opposite of unique.
I don't know. I think I like the fact that Cisco's the gorilla in the market means they have more gear out there, so there's a lot more on the gray market, so you usually get pretty good prices on it.
But like, so where I was going with this was that, like, so Arista, you can get to, I believe it's a bash prompt in the switch. That's pretty common with white box switches, but then white box have, they usually have their own limitations for buffer sizes and therefore not good with really mixing different, port speeds. But it's nice just to be able to drop down in your switch to do a TCP dump, to do just generic Linux things. Juniper supports virtual interfaces, where you can assign, and I haven't actually done it, so I could have the process wrong, but basically what it does is that if you have an interface and a whole bunch of VLANs on it, you can set those VLANs up as virtual interfaces, and you can apply your own MAC limitations per VLAN, per interface. You can do SNMP monitoring on that VLAN, on that interface. You know, Mikrotik can do that because everything's just an interface. There's no separation, really.
That's common on Cisco kit as well.
Where? Never seen it.
You do like say it's interface gig 0/1, then you do .2, and then you can tell it here's the encapsulation type. This is the VLAN it's associated with, so it'll create a virtual interface underneath, and you can have just tons of those jokers under there, and then apply their own IP addresses, their own policies, all kinds.
So this what Mike is talking about is a bit different.
Yeah, because Mike's talking about being able to drop into the command line, right? And do some kind of TCP dumps and stuff like that.
So like that was with Arista, but like with Juniper, like SNMP will expose all your interface stats for one VLAN on one.
This is not a routed VLAN interface. It doesn't have an IP address.
Oh, you're just talking about 2 on a switch.
And
on a switch trunk port, you have the ability to tap into individuals' VLANs that are passing the traffic, but not terminate.
I see what you're thinking. So, like on trunk 1, going over here to the left, you can look at the individual VLANs transiting on that trunk port and be able to monitor that. That's baller.
Without actually terminating those VLAN interfaces on that switch.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Can't you just do a span port for that same functionality? If you wanted to monitor everything going through a particular port, not necessarily terminating, you can just span the port. Or span a bridge.
I guess that wouldn't really be good for just trying to simply via SNMP monitor throughput on that VLAN across that link there, right?
Okay, for SNMP. Yeah, I guess.
I mean, it would work. It would just be, kind of overkill because you have to have something to then take all that traffic and then...
Well, that's what a span port is for. You have a monitoring server.
Oh, sure. Sure.
But you are not interested in the contents of the traffic, right? You just want to know the
just what are
counters, basically.
Yeah.
Well, what about what's that protocol that a lot of vendors are using? It's just you kind of like stream not the data but the information of like headers and whatnot to what is it called?
Oh, like NetFlow, SFlow.
NetFlow and SFlow, yeah.
Yeah, you could, but that's another whole, separate infrastructure you need, and then software you need to process in there, NFlow or SFlow, and get the information out of it. The beauty of this is that it's very simple. You just expose counters for individuals' VLANs on an interface, right? And you can also filter it super easy. You can say, I am just interested in this particular VLAN on this particular port, and that's it.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. Now I understand where you're going with this. So this is more for like a data center kind of setup.
Well, I'm assuming you're talking about your IX, right?
It would certainly have use in the IX. So like, where that would be useful for us right now is like in Chicago. Like we don't have our IX proper in Chicago. It's just kind of people using us to get to other places. If we're reselling somebody else's exchange that is in Chicago, to our other stuff. And so we can have a guy that he has multiple VLANs, multiple services. Only way I can, I only know how much traffic he's doing in aggregate on a port. I have no way of knowing without going into flows, but then flows is not, it's not exactly precise in that way, to know how many megabits per second is he transiting of cogent transit, how much is Midwest IX Indy, how much is, Chi IX, how much is something else. On a Juniper switch with this virtual interface thing, you just monitor another OID and bam, that's what now you know exactly what he's doing for each of those VLANs.
Is it inherently already on all the trunk ports, or do you have to go in and create a virtual interface on that trunk port to be able to monitor that?
I have no idea.
All right.
Juniper does it by default. Yes, every single VLAN on every single interface in SNMP creates a virtual interface.
That's baller.
I know because they had to implement a custom handling for this within the NetXMS because without the custom handling, it was thinking that every single one of those VLANs was a separate interface, which they are not. They are just virtual representations of traffic on physical interfaces.
Just let me ask you, why couldn't you monitor at the edge and aggregate all of his traffic if he has multiple edges? Or could you do this at layer 3?
You could do all of this with SFlow. The point is it becomes really complicated to define which flows in which directions originating from which ports and going to which ports you are interested in. Since NetFlow or SFlow are not layer 2 protocols, right? They are just streaming headers to you. So you lose the information from which port to which port on which switch, etc. They are you are looking at a flow. And this is different because here you want to look at a particular VLAN on a particular port of a particular switch.
Yeah.
And then with like NetFlow, SFlow, so on, they sample. You get because it is metadata for a packet. They don't send you every single one.
Packet.
They'll send you 1 out of 1,000.
Yeah.
For instance. So then, overall, it'll be similar. But if you have a switch that's moving in aggregate, 80 gigs through it, you're going to lose precision on a guy that, is only moving 10 megabits on one VLAN on one port. That won't show up because you're only sampling 1 of every 1,000 packets. If you're doing 80 gigs, 10 megs is not going to show. So now you have no measurement, whereas the SNMP counter would.
Could you monitor traffic by AS? Because I'm assuming every one of your customers has an AS, right?
Well, so in this particular case, all this, the switch is just aggregating different layer 3 services and presenting it on one physical port on multiple VLANs. So some of it's not even our content per se.
Right.
Oh, okay.
So this is pure layer 2 for you, right?
Right, yeah. And so, I have a Cogent 10 gig port in, and I'm farming it out to a bunch of people. Well, then they may also get Indianapolis traffic, or they also may get the other Chicago IX. And I'm not involved in the layer 3 process for any of those. Well, that switch isn't. But being able to account for each of those things. But there's so many other applications for that beyond just my IX thing in Chicago.
Yeah.
But then my intent with the post was does anybody else have something like that that's unique? I only know of Juniper being able to do that. I only know of Arista, aside from the white boxes, that can drop down to the Linux command line. Does anybody else have something?
So on Juniper, you can drop into the BSD command line because Juniper runs on BSD.
Okay.
I think the Cisco iOS XR stuff you can drop into the sub Linux command line as well.
Yes, also on Cisco Firepower you can drop into the underlying Linux command line as well.
I'm curious. There's got to be other IXs that have a billing software in place that does this. There must be some off the shelf.
Well, this is your switch has to support it first. Your switch has built to.
This is not really for billing because for billing you are looking just at aggregate traffic from an AS, right? Which that's easy, right? We are talking if you are using this for much more than just billing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess I'm not 100% certain exactly what Mike needs it for. What is the intended purpose? Just to be able to see traffic that's going through your IX and knowing how much traffic is coming from any given host or whatnot.
Well, and so in this specific case, part of it is billing because,
of course,
Cogent transit price is different than resale of the Chicago IX price, which is different than resale of the Indianapolis IX price. So part of that is billing. But once once you have that presented as a virtual interface, you know, there's so many things you can do with it. You know, you can allow, like, you know, NIX may only allow a certain MAC address to be presented to it. So then you can take that one step further and you can filter that so that on this VLAN you only get one MAC address and it's this. You know, there's just, you know, once you take the, which, you know, anyone who's used Mikrotik for 20 years can say, well, yeah, Mikrotik can do all these things. It can. It's just
so there is,
they have their own drawbacks.
There is also a star on this, because with Mikrotik you can do all of this, but if you use the CRSs, which use the hardware switch chips, they can do much less than you can do in the full software bridge, right? So there is a lot of asterisks on a Mikrotik too. How you are going to do this and what cost are you going to pay for doing it?
Sure, yeah.
Whereas the big box switches simply support all of this in ASIC. In Mikrotik, if you want a lot of these advanced features, you have to go to software bridging, which comes with, you know, performance.
But you know, I have fairly limited exposure to switches out there in the world, you know, to using Alcatel-Lucent switches or modern Brocade switches or, you know, on and on and on. You know, I didn't know, you know, if any of those vendors had a, you know, this is something that we do really well that nobody else does. You know, that was kind of where I was going.
Gotcha.
This kind of fizzled out. I'm wondering how many listeners are still awake. How many accidents did you cause, Mike, for people listening to this in their car, veering off?
You just put it on 1.5 speed and burn through it. I thought it was interesting. It's interesting, kind of. I love going down the troubleshooting tree, all the different things you'd try. So, Mikey, you got Chi-NOG on here. That's coming up May 23rd. I'm guessing since that's in your backyard, you're going to be there, right?
Yeah, I'll be there. Wilson will be there.
I think
our other partner in the IX, Scott, will be there.
What's his name? Is it Tomas Kopczynski? Is
something like
one
that?
Of the,
yeah.
I think I met him at NANOG, the one in Dallas. Really cool guy, and I think he's one of the main organizers. So be sure to go up and say hi.
Yeah, and so this is Chi-NOG 8 or 9, I think, something like that. I've been going since Chi-NOG 3. When it was only like 40 people there, and now they've got like 300 people going to these things. It's just a mini localized NANOG. You know, you get some of the national, international types that go there, but you know, very few. Most of it is, you know, guys from local, you know, big local businesses, guys from local universities, guys from local, you know, data centers, and it's just like, you know, it says the name implies, Chicago area, you know, network operators group. And I think we're actually stepping up. I think this will be the first year where we have multiple tracks going. Maybe last year was too. Yeah, it's just, you know, it's pretty cheap. It's like $50 or $5, something like that to go.
So if you're in the area, pop over and say hi.
Yeah.
Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. All right, so next you've got LibreNMS PHP requirement change. What's the story on that? That hit a lot of people, I think.
I heard about that.
And I don't know if they yet require the change, but I did it the other day because I got tired of every time I went into Libre, it popped up saying, you have to upgrade your PHP 7 by this day. They were no longer supporting 7.0 of PHP. You had to have 7.1.3, but then they recommended, I think, 7.2. And what I found annoying about it is that, you know, Debian is going to be one of your most popular, you know, Linux distributions, and, you know, natively they didn't support a newer PHP. You know, you couldn't just do apt-get install PHP 7.2 and be done with it. You had to install a third-party repository, and then you had to handle all the configuration changes and, you know, package dependency changes from running on, natively supported 7.0 to 7.2, and there's just a whole big spider web of stuff that had to be done that was beyond just a simple, apt-get update, apt-get upgrade. And it's really annoying.
That may have been able to be avoided had you, if you focus heavily on the release notes and some of the other notes about what natively is supported by Debian. I know Nick Arellano helped you out with that. He got you back on your feet with getting PHP to work properly.
See, here's the trick. So, nobody really reads release notes. Nobody.
Actually, I do. I do. Especially when it comes to Mikrotik, I read release notes for Cisco, switches in particular. Before I upgrade, I need to make sure that first of all, why am I upgrading? Is it fixed? And are there any open caveats that are in the new releases? So I can't say that I read every piece of software that I ever upgrade. Typically, I have vendors that'll just tell me, and that's why I pay vendor support to tell me, hey, don't upgrade this, or we've released this and it's stable and it's working, and stuff like that. But stuff that I do on my own, I definitely read the release notes.
Yeah, that makes me think of somebody told me a long time ago, today's bug is a direct result of yesterday's bug fix. So
yeah.
It's gonna happen one way or the other. Just try and mitigate it as best you can. So let's
actually wait. And just last note on that. Funny enough, because I know what's his name, man down under, Thrift. He works for FortiGate, and I used to do a lot with FortiGate. And the funny thing about FortiGate is there is an upgrade path. If you're on a very old version, you can't just upgrade to the newest version. You got to go in like a certain amount of steps. And sometimes, if you're really behind, you got to upgrade 4 or 5 times, rebooting your firewall 4 or 5 times just to make it to the latest upgrade. So I've learned from an early age to read the release notes because sometimes there is an upgrade path. And surprisingly, even in Cisco there is. I know the Cisco phones, you can't just upgrade to the latest version. There is an upgrade path. I haven't seen it. Whatever. Anyway, just 7.5.2b has to be upgraded before going anything forward. But anyway, yeah, upgrade paths can be very
tricky.
Very goose chasing. What is it called? A goose chase? Yeah. Anyway.
Duck goose?
Yeah.
All right, so let's hit some of the Slack updates. So these are my favorite parts. I tend to go through and aggregate a little bit of the stuff that goes through there. And so Mike Niddle does a lot of fiber stuff. And he's been very active because Mike's been asking a lot of various questions as well as other people. And so he was talking about so whenever you're putting conduit underground that you're going to pull through, he suggests, he highly recommends, because he's done it the other way before, to use silicore HDPE conduit. I guess it's got kind of a silicore internal coating, I guess, which makes it slicker and easier to pull fiber through. Is that the idea, Mike?
It's like lube for fiber.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is lube for fiber, and if there's, if your conduit is, lined with silicone, you may not need it, or you need less of it. Yeah,
because you got to think. I mean, if you're pulling 1,000 feet and there's some gradual bends here and there, whether you think there are or not, those bundles can get pretty tight. So, why not give it every advantage you can? Last thing you want to do is damage it. That would suck.
Oh, yeah. And then in the deployment that I'm planning on upcoming, using Future Path conduit, which is 1.5-inch diameter conduit that has 7 other micro ducts inside of it. And when you install it, you install the conduit, and then you just have this little blowing machine that you hook up at your source. And then it blows air in, and the fiber itself is kind of rifled, as is the conduit a little bit. And so that when you blow the air across, it creates kind of an even buffer of the air around the fiber in the conduit to kind of levitate the fiber in, so so that it doesn't touch the edge of it.
So
because
those inner cells, are they collapsible? Are they sort of?
No.
All right, so they're rigid inner cells inside a 1.5-inch.
Yeah. Because the guy that's in our area that's done a lot of this so far, you're going to push 7,000 feet at once, or possibly more. Obviously, you could do less if there's lots of bends or hills or things that are going to cause some drag on it. But you can push 7,000 feet at a time. So it needs to be as pristine as it can for pushing it through.
So the air provides the air kind of reduces the friction as it's going through.
Right. Yeah.
Like kind of like an air hockey table. You got these little holes that pushes up your puck, and it kind of just glides. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. And like with the speed that this install, it'll push, 300-400 feet a minute.
Doesn't that break the speed limit?
So like you can, it takes a long time to get all the conduit installed in the network, but if you can use this setup to then push the fiber in later, in a day you could get, potentially tens of thousands of feet of fiber done in one day, just one or two guys, much faster than many other methods.
That's cool. I like the idea of the inner cells being rigid, because we've used MaxCell before, which is it's sort of like I don't know, it's like a collapsible core that you can run inside a conduit, right? So it just stays flat, and it's got a bunch of different little chambers, and you can just pull through one, and then when you need the next one, you pull through, and it expands, right? As you the only problem with outdoor utilization of that is if your pull box ever gets full of rainwater and it starts backing mud into there, then those collapsed cores will get packed in with mud, and then they're not going to want to expand back out anymore, right? So if you actually had rigid inner conduit with rigid inner tubes inside, I guess that would alleviate that. You wouldn't have to worry about those jokers getting stopped up with mud anymore.
Yeah, I look at this conduit obviously costs more than regular conduit. I think this conduit's probably like $2 a foot, just ballpark. I'm getting prices, I think, later next week. And your regular inch and a half conduit's 30 cents, but you've got 7 or 8. I think they can even do up to like 20 some of those micro ducts inside one bigger conduit.
Yeah. How often do you really re-pull back through the exact same conduit though?
I'm looking at quite a bit of it. Yeah.
Oh. Usually we see the carriers just pull a ton of fiber on the first go and then leave themselves some expansion room, but they never seem to come back and touch the expansion.
Yeah. Well, and so if in our area, there's a lot of people doing wholesale type stuff. And so you can, if somebody wants a duct, you can sell them a duct for half of what it costs you to build the whole thing in the first place.
Yeah. They've
saved money and you've paid back half your investment. Yeah. Just for the first guy. But I'm looking at in some of my fiber to the business scenarios, I'm looking at avoiding splice cases in the field altogether because they're expensive and they're time consuming. If I can do some of this now, and the bigger deployments, I'll have to do some splice cases, but if I can do one of those microducts from the business into a vault that's near the business where I aggregate 4, 5, 6 of them together, and then I put each of those into one of the future paths, and then I just run, like I say, a 6-strand to each business. I don't need 6, but it's easy. There's not much price difference. Then I can eliminate all the splice cases in the field, which are $200, $300, $400 a piece. You've got a guy that's spending hours and hours out there splicing each time you go from a small count to a big count, and then next big count to the next. Whereas if you can just splice at the A and Z locations and be done with it, then you've saved yourself a lot of time.
All right, and I guess most of where you're talking about running this stuff, it's rural, right? So,
well, it's not suburban. It isn't downtown Chicago, but I would say it's any small town USA. Probably not much different from College Station or something like that.
Well, the only reason I bring it up is you said you don't want to put vaults where you could do splicing very often, and if you're going to drop a connection to a customer, you have to do it at a splice point. You can't just pick an arbitrary point along the fiber run. That's why sometimes people will look at fiber maps. They're like, well, you run right in front of my business. And it's like, well, yeah, but we don't have a vault for, 2 miles,
Sure. Well, and I'll have vaults out there, but they won't have this, but I won't have splice cases. Because the splice cases is a few, I'll spend a couple $100 to put a vault out there just to have physical space to put slack loops and a place for the conduits that come together. But then a splice case is a few $100 just to patch on a couple guys. Whereas if I can, it may not be that much different cost-wise at the beginning, trading off spending $300 for a splice case versus however many more hundreds or thousands of feet of, 6 strand. But if I cannot have my guys sitting out there doing all the splicings, however many days or weeks it'll take them to do all the splicing.
Labor's always the most expensive part of these projects.
Yeah, splice it in the tray, inside cabinet at my, central point, and splice it at the tray in the business. It's much easier and faster to splice when you're in an environmentally controlled area than sitting in a trailer in February when it's 6 degrees or August when it's 95.
For sure.
Do it inside. Get it done.
All right. So for all of you people that aren't using fiber stuff, Thomas had some musings that I found interesting. He had an observation. He said that he's noticed a trend in open source projects with corporate backers. So the corporate backer does support for the product. He says that there's a distinct lack in documentation these days. Care to comment on that, Thomas?
So it's not even about corporate specing open source. It's just open source with commercial companies behind it.
Ah, gotcha.
So you have many examples. My particular example was NGINX. And, oh man, where
Free Radius? Is that where we're at right now?
Okay, Free Radius was a little bit better, but still. This will be another huge tangent, so stop me when it gets too much. But basically, over the last 3 to 4 weeks, I have been working on one quite large project, which is not related to Unimus. They talked me into basically, this was a project I did like 8 years ago, and they talked me into upgrading the entire project and improving security and blah, blah, blah. Whatever. The point is that over the past weeks, I have spent 7 entire days basically reading every single piece of documentation on NGINX there is. I'm happy to say that I've learned it and that I understand. Basically, okay, maybe back up a little bit. So how I deal with the software that I deploy or the systems that I use is that I am uncomfortable using a system which I don't understand how it's configured, right? I personally, I really don't like just looking up some tutorial, Control-C, Control-V pasting and it works somehow. That's just not acceptable to me. I need to know what the software is doing, how it's doing it, how it's configured, if everything is right, if everything is secured, if everything is, as it should be. That's just my personal directive on how I deal with the solutions that I deploy. And it's brought me a lot of pain over the years, but that's just how I do things. So basically, when I needed to deploy NGINX, I had to spend, as I said, days and days actually studying every single configuration directive in the configuration files, how it's configured, how it should be configured, etc., etc., etc. And the point there was that the documentation for NGINX, I am sorry, is horrible. It's just so bad. There is conflicting examples online. The default packaging in Debian is just horrible. Like the best example is you have 2 files that are deployed out of the box when you install the package, apt-get install NGINX core or NGINX Lite. And you have 2 files, which one of them is fastgdi.params, and the other is fastgdi_params. And you have no way of knowing what is the difference. You look into the files and they differ by 2 lines. So what is the difference? Why are there two, and how am I supposed to use which one, etc.? And like there is so many things I could tell you. Like I could go into a whole rabbit hole of how PHP path parameters are dealt with, and there is 5 ways to do it, and each of them has drawbacks and blah blah blah. The point is the default configuration, which again out of the box you open the default site, and it tells you specifically, disable this parameter because it's not secure. And you start going down this rabbit hole of documentation, and you look into NGI-NX documentation, it tells you something. You look into PHP documentation, it tells you something completely else. You start searching like guides, how to configure this, and what the implications of changing those settings are, and you find out it's a whole world of complexity and intricate, connections between NGI-NX and PHP when it's installed as a fast CGI daemon, and it's like, Jesus. And the documentation is conflicting because it's different in different versions of NGI-NX and in different versions of PHP, and it's just hours upon hours, and just frustration and headaches everywhere in reading pages of documentation. Anyway, the point is that you have articles on the official NGI-NX wiki which are conflicting, right? One of them tells you to do this, and the other tells you to do that, and it's directly conflicting with each other. Or you simply have completely, on the documentation for each NGI-NX module, there is a documentation for each configuration statement, right? And those, they just assume you already know intricately well the inner workings of the HTTP protocol, right? Like set this HTTP cookie to this, which will tell HTTP to do that. And it's like, okay, now I have to look up what that cookie does, and why do I even want to set it, and how it, how browsers do this, because this has a lot to do with the browser as well, right? When you pass cookies back to the browser, or, the browser then does certain behavior, and it's like, just Jesus. And this was just to deploy NGI-NX, right? And if I deployed it out of the box, you deploy it out of the box, and you find out the configuration out of the box doesn't do half of the things it should do.
So
it does.
What's your, if you had to, kind of make your best guess as to why the documentation is so scattered and so lacking? The way I read your post and kind of the way you're going is that it seemed like perhaps those corporate companies that do support kind of purposely don't make adequate documentation so that you'll have to use their services. Is that kind of...
I don't want to say purposely, because I don't think it's on purpose. The point is that they are not incentivized to have good public-facing documentation because it doesn't earn them revenue, right? They don't have the incentive to keep the wiki up to date, to look for those conflicting articles and fix them. They don't have any reason to spend time on proper documentation and fix it, etc., because that's not what pays their bills.
Gotcha. That would just cost the money, wouldn't make the money.
Exactly. It would cost, not make money. So basically, indirectly, they are intensive, they have incentives to not deal with the documentation, and they can just tell, if you want this to be right, just pay us like $15,000 a year for an enterprise support, and we will make sure that all of your stuff is done well and it's proper and everything works, right? But that's not the point of open source. And this is not just with NGI-NX. FreeRadius, although I have to admit FreeRadius was better, but in the end I spent literally 6 days with FreeRadius free, because I had a previous FreeRadius 2 deployment that was somehow configured 7 years ago, and it was working, but I needed to completely migrate this to FreeRadius free. And part of the requirements for this project that I was doing is that there should not be clear text credentials anywhere on the network. And this is like a whole another rabbit hole that I can get into later. Basically, if somebody tells you this sentence, just run away because it's horrible, because suddenly you have to deal with things like, FreeRadius talks to a database. So the data inside of the database session is also clear text. So now you have to deploy TSL, transport layer security, on the database session between your FreeRadius server and the database server, which means you need to deploy certificates onto the database server, which in our case was MariaDB, the MySQL offshoot. And then you have to deal with the MySQL driver inside of FreeRadius, not supporting TSL certificates and all other stuff. The point is that in the end it was 6 full days just to completely, fully, securely, and properly set up FreeRadius 3, which, 6 days just to set up a single software solution, in my mind, is just unacceptable. And again, FreeRadius has a commercial company behind it. And I am sorry to say, but the guys from FreeRadius are assholes. They are.
If you finally heard Kernak curse, I'm so proud of coming to the dark
I like it when
side.
you get spicy.
And but no, it's just look on any help or on their mailing list, on any forums and like support things, and you will find that they are assholes in a way that, again, they are not incentivized to help people for free. I understand they are running a business, therefore they will just tell you, in case of FreeRadius, this is $5,000 a year per server. Of course, since we are redundant, we have 2 servers, which would be $10,000 a year for 2 servers, and I could pay that, and they would help me with everything, I'm sure. But the point is, again, this is open source, so you go to their mailing list and you find your issue on their mailing list, because you see the error messages. Somebody has certainly run into this issue before, and you see the developers, literally the developers of FreeRadius, just be assholes. Like tell you, oh, did you read the documentation? Look, it's there, and there is a link to the wiki. They don't want to help. They just want to provide enough of a support to see that they are doing some kind of free support, but you can see that they aren't trying to really help. They don't go that extra, it's not really helpful. It's just pointing to the documentation, and the documentation itself points to a lot more documentation, and again, you go this rabbit hole of 6 days just studying documentation, right? And so I think this also applies to LibreNMS and the deal with PHP. I think it ties into that quite nicely. It's free software, and sure, you should read the changelogs, and I am also a person who reads all of the changelogs, like I mentioned previously. I'm a control freak, which has to understand all of the software that I'm deploying and how it's configured and what it's doing. But I understand people who aren't. People who just want software to work, it should just work, right? You should not have to spend 6 days studying documentation. You should not have to, if there is a warning that you need to upgrade PHP, then there should be a step-by-step guide how to do it, which people who want the option of just copy-pasting and having it work, there should be that option. But again, it's open source software, and they are not really incentivized to provide that option, since it doesn't pay them. It creates expenses for them to test this all, to make sure it works, to put it in there, to even research. It would put burden on them, and they don't want to get that burden because they're getting paid for it.
That you definitely have a good point there, but I also think that if a company puts out good documentation, obviously they're going to get more of the market share. I know Nick Arellano really likes Nginx, and he's a big PHP guy. So he himself says that it's not well documented. But if a company like Nginx or FreeRadius puts out better documentation, they would take a bigger chunk of the marketplace, and then just from percentage-wise, let's say they get 0.5%, which sounds like nothing, but if the market is mostly using their product, it's going to benefit them in the end anyway. If something is hard to use, then why would anybody start using it? And if they started using it, then they're in trouble.
This is a little bit different, because we live in a different world, being business owners of our small companies or running WISPs, etc. What these guys after are huge corporate contracts, and since I now run Unimus and we have corporate customers, and I am not sure how many of you guys have experience dealing with the corporate world. What I hear from a lot of people these days, that there are literally predatory and like alienating and aggressive marketing tactics going on from these software companies into the enterprise and world, because it's just, there is money. So the enterprise, if it has options of what are we going to use, there is FreeRadius, and there is Cisco, and then there is nothing else. And if you don't want to be Cisco vendor locked in and pay, like 200,000 K a year to Cisco, then we will do FreeRadius, because that's the only other choice. And if the documentation sucks, then we will pay, 50K a year to FreeRadius, and we still saved 150K. And that corporate contract, a single corporate contract, is worth to a small software solution provider like FreeRadius is worth, 50 small customers, right? So it's from it's a really complicated discussion.
It's not I mean, it actually makes a lot of sense. If you're a small company, and this one whale, would equal the same as 50 individual customers, because we do the same thing. I mean, all of us do the same thing at some point or another, right? Those 50 customers, they're going to consume X amount of man hours for us to get them turned up, get them, going, get them supported. Whereas I could do a fraction of the time and energy associated with those 50 customers for this one and get this huge output. I mean, it absolutely makes sense.
That is one way to look at it, but you get less security with big companies because their loyalty is to no one.
Yeah.
So if you put all your eggs in the big basket of big corporate companies, and then one of them leaves,
I've worked with some big enterprises that use really expensive software packages that they've been using for years and years because the guys inside don't want to re-educate themselves. So they're. Yeah. I found it's interesting to me.
What happens when some other company comes along and says, we'll replace this old antiquated software that you're using with this new software?
Have you ever tried using that argument against the corporation?
Yeah. So
corporations are
especially in government, these guys, they aren't incentivized to save any money, right? They don't want change because then they have to learn new things. So the easiest thing for them to do is to steady the course, even if it costs 25% more or 40% more.
Yeah, just increase the budget.
Because they don't care.
That's the
because
answer to anything,
I don't
government.
have to think. I don't have to work. I just keep going straight.
Yeah.
And I've noticed with open source too, there's if you're a company that's going to run a lot of open source, you're going to pay more for your employees, right? If you're just an all Windows shop and you're pulling binaries down and they double click and install, you don't have to. That employee can manage more things with less time, right? Because he doesn't have to, like Thomas said, he doesn't have to spend a full week just combing through documentation to figure out how to do this stuff because there's an easy button, right? All of these off-the-shelf commercial products they buy, while they are more expensive, employee-wise, it's going to save you a lot of time there. Whereas if you go all open source, it seems like you have to have a better caliber of employee. Now, maybe that employee can script more efficiencies or something like, right? I mean, there's always variables associated with it, but from me, I could tell companies that want to do less, or their employees want to do less, especially government, which is a juicy target. They want those easy buttons, right? They just want the thing that they double click and never think about it again. And to be honest with you, sometimes I get that way myself, just because, we get limited time and, you want to actually see your kids every now and then.
Look, see, I get it. But my point is, and this is why Unimus is not free and is not open source, because honestly, we have some, we have how to
you have overhead. You have overhead.
Not overhead, but we want to provide software that works properly, right? That just works. The point of Unimus is to be simple and fast to use and fast to deploy. So if we want to make it like this, we can't be open source, because what do open source companies live from? It's the support contracts, right? So if we made Unimus as easy as it is right now, as accessible, as deployable, as, you want to upgrade Unimus, it's literally one line of shell. We will never tell you upgrade PHP, do this, do that. We handle all of this at our backend. We handle all of this on our side. This is what we are paid for, right? We handle the complexity for the customer. Our customer never has to deal with anything. It's always one line of shell. It's always one click. That's one of our design principles of Unimus. But we can't exist in an open source way like this because nobody would pay us. We wouldn't be able to live because we wouldn't have paychecks, because it would be open source and it would just work and it would be easy, right?
Yeah.
So it's and I don't know if you guys know what has been going on with MongoDB lately. That has been a whole another thing. Anybody know?
Yeah, it's shit.
No, that's not the point. Okay, again, stop me if I go too deep down the rabbit hole. But so MongoDB is an open source document-based database system, right? So they have been open source, and of course there is a commercial company behind Mongo. But what has happened is that since Mongo was open source, they were living exactly on big support contracts from corporations who are using Mongo and are paying the company behind Mongo, for how to best implement this, for performance improvements, etc. Because when you are a corporate and you need a document database system, you use the open source Mongo and you pay for support, blah, blah, blah. So the point is that Amazon now is offering a hosted MongoDB solution, where you just click a button and suddenly, magically, in the cloud, you have MongoDB and you don't care about everything. about anything. You don't have to manage it. You don't have to nothing. It's Mongo as a service. So now MongoDB is in big trouble because suddenly they are dropping support contracts. Because those corporates don't need to maintain and manage those environments anymore because Amazon has taken over. So MongoDB actually rescinded their part of their open source license, and they changed their licensing. They used to be GPL, full free open source software licensing. They now changed their license where they specifically prohibit hosting cloud service providers to host MongoDB. They are still open source, but you cannot host it. It's literally there in the license. So
what did Amazon do in response?
So
get like 3 million of their lawyers?
This doesn't apply retroactively, right? Because it applies only from a certain version, and also Amazon, technically they don't have to run Mongo on backend. Amazon has millions of developers. They can develop their own database. They just have to be API compatible. So those clients, those database drivers inside of the software, work against the Amazon service. So this is different, but the point again is the same. It was open source with a commercial company behind it, which was open source, because it's popular. And people are saying, okay, so what's the point of even being open source when as soon as there is somebody who provides your open source package as a service, your company starts going under, and now you need to change your open source license. Why even be open source at that point where basically the entire model of running an open source company is stuck 10 years in the past? And of course, this is just one opinion. And again, this is a very complicated topic, and there is many opinions on this discussion. If anybody is interested, you can read up on this. But it's just open source, I feel, is a mess up to the point now that after, spending weeks on NGINX and FreeRadius and other open source solutions, I feel that open source is in a really weird place right now where, sure, it's free, it doesn't cost me anything, but to properly deploy it and understand it, and you just have to purchase that support anyway at the end of the day. And I don't like that. At that point, why just not be commercial?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of arguments against that, but I'm not
I get it.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into
especially, I'm not saying that's the right way to go either, right? Because when you are commercial and you go to the SolarWinds or Cisco Wave, or I laugh at SolarWinds to this day because you go to their website and it's starting at $3,000. Well, screw you. Yeah. No small company is going to pay $3,000 for starting software suite.
It's even more than that. When you say open source is that, I mean, I'm not sure which side of the fence you sit on. You make good arguments for both sides, but for example, Linux is open source, and that was never supposed to work out, and now that pretty much runs the technology world.
See, this is different because Linux doesn't have a commercial company behind it. Sure, there are companies. That's different because Red Hat, it's just a distribution of Linux. So, but it's just one of the distributions. You have many distributions to choose from, and many of them don't. Of course, Ubuntu also has Canonical behind it.
Oh, hold on. I didn't want to get into a debate about it. I'm just throwing my 2 cents out there. A bigger question that I have is not even a question, but I'm so curious. In your early days of dating your wife, I wonder what that must have been like. Because of how detailed-oriented you are. I can only imagine. If I had a time machine, I would want to go back to experience that, to witness that.
So first of all, I am not yet married.
Oh, all right.
And,
you showed me a picture of your wife or something.
He's got a girlfriend, long-term girlfriend.
Oh, okay.
And second of all, nothing is simple with me. She knows that. It's one of the things, everything with me just has to be complicated and has to be completely in-depth and understood and analyzed. And I just am who I am.
Well, you know what? You make a good product and you have a lot of good points, so I'm sure it's well justified.
Yeah. We need Thomases in the world, just like we need a couple of Daves.
Ah! I know you're lying about the second part.
Well, I said a couple. We really only need one. That's we've reached quota there. But no, it's and it's funny in my older age, things increasingly need to be logical for me. If it doesn't follow a logical path, it breaks my brain and it stops right there. I need it to make sense. But the problem is most of the things that don't make sense are people, and people obviously don't make sense. So that's one of those impasses I'll never get around. So I need to kind of let that go.
anyway, to sum up, because I've gone on long enough, I am not saying commercial software is better or open source is better, but it's just that currently it's a mess, and I think companies are choosing open source for the wrong reasons, right? Because I just think if somebody wants to make open source software, they should be fully aware of what that means, and they should understand the reasons they are doing it for, and they should understand how open source monetization work, and they should have a plan rather than being in a mess that they are right now. I don't have answers. I'm not saying one is better than the other. It's just that I am frustrated from what I've seen in the last few weeks.
I think it boils down to case by case basis, because we use open source software and we have paid for software. And in our case, the paid for software is nowhere nearly as good as the open source software. And I'll just end with that.
Yeah, I think you can find cases like this in both shitty open source and commercial and the other way around. Yeah,
that's why I said case by case. It's
definitely
not all black or white.
Oh yeah,
definitely.
Nothing ever is, obviously. But I mean, we could keep. I'm not going to keep beating the horse, but everybody's going to have a different set of anecdotes to support both sides probably. So I think this all started from lacking in documentation and spiraled into the open source as a whole. But I'm very much in that camp of the easier it is, the more apt I am to use your product. And I hate having to read tons of documentation. Sometimes I just want things to work, and if I can get it up and working and then figure out how it works, I know that's doing it backwards, and it's probably making Thomas's ears burn a little bit, but sometimes that's the route I'll go, right? So if I can just get this thing stood up, and also think about it too, if I want to demo a product and it takes me a week just to figure out how to play with it, I'm probably not going to use it, right? But if it's simple enough, like Unimus, where a couple of clicks, 15, 20, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever, I've got it up and working and I can play with it, I'm probably going to go with that product. Anyway, let's move on. So Thomas also had another tidbit that I thought was really great. I think somebody was talking about, I can't remember. They were talking about MUM presentations, and they said, hey, you should do one on this. And Thomas said, well, you could just do this one simple thing. And it was safe mode. And so for you guys that have used Mikrotik and you see the little safe mode button up at the top or on the CLI, you can enter safe mode with Control X, I think. It's basically a system whereby you enter safe mode. If you make changes and you accidentally knock yourself out of the router, it'll revert all of your changes up to the point you went into safe mode, right? So you can safely make changes, I guess is the idea. Well, if you make one change and it boops you off and you had to actually make several changes, then it's kind of problematic. But Thomas says all you have to do is go safe mode, open curly brace, put all of your commands in there, close curly brace, and so until it sees the closed curly brace, it won't apply all of those things. So theoretically, if you have to enter multiple commands for this connectivity to stay up and work, you could do it that way. Does that sound right, Thomas?
Yeah, so basically it's about approaching changes as a single change, right? Either everything is applied or nothing is applied. Which normally in Mikrotik is not the case, because as you enter commands, they are applied, and so when you go into save mode, yeah, sure, you need to enter 5 commands, but command number 3 will disconnect you, and that's a problem because it will revert, all of your config, and you can't apply those changes inside of save mode. But you want to use save mode because you want to be safe, right? So yeah, that's why basically how it works is you open a code block, and everything inside of that block is executed only after you close the block, which is the curly brackets open, curly brackets close, as opposed to executing commands one by one as you enter them. So it's different in that way. So yeah, you can just go to save mode, open curly brackets, open a code block, paste 20 commands, close a code block, and you know that either everything will be applied or nothing will be applied, and it will be reverted.
That's baller. And I was today years old when I learned that, so it's a good little tidbit.
Also, one other tidbit that there was inside of this conversation particularly was that if you are using code blocks like this, Mikrotik actually has error handling for code blocks. Or, if you're coming from a coding background, basically it's a try-catch block, catch an error. And you can look on the wiki how to do this, but basically it's do and curly brackets, and then after the curly brackets you just do on error equals to, and then another code block of what should happen on error. And why this is useful is because, again, imagine you are entering 5 commands, and command number 3 has a syntax error. Well, 2 commands will be applied, the third command will error out, and then 2 commands will again be applied, right? So here, since you are entering it in a code block, the code block will first be parsed, and if there is a syntax error, none of the commands will apply. So it's again about that, atomicity. You are making atomic changes. Either everything is applied or nothing is applied, which is very useful for scripting and for.
Absolutely, because there's going to come a time, if it hasn't already, that you're going to need to do that. So it's good to keep that in your toolbox just in case.
Yeah, so code blocks and on errors, very useful Mikrotik scripting or CLI tricks.
Cool. We'll put the links in. All right, so something else I found interesting was somebody posted up that there's companies now that are offering zero-day bounties for Mikrotik routers. Is that a good sign? Does that mean they finally made it? They could be proud of themselves?
So the word on the street, or the conspiracy theory, you could say, is that there was a very big client that forced Mikrotik to do this. Basically, Mikrotik is actually paying out those bounties to a bug hunting company because some very big client requested that Mikrotik has this because they wanted to, deploy Mikrotik somewhere and they wanted to find all of the possible bugs that are out there, and what's the best way to find bugs? Well, encourage people to find them by paying them for it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we had a 20-minute conversation on before. People are going to do the things that they're getting paid for, right? So why not offering them incentives?
Isn't that what, what is it, that hacker convention, HackCon or something, where companies would...
White Hat, Black Hat, DEF CON.
Yeah. They pay hackers to get into their software, and if they get in, they usually offer them really high-paying jobs in the company. So, I mean, it's nothing that hasn't been done before, but that's pretty cool that Mikrotik finally... which company is the one that's actually offering the bounty? Is it, you said Mikrotik is paying for it, but who actually? So
Mikrotik is not publicly involved in this in any way, right? So it's done through a third-party company, which people are speculating Mikrotik is actually, paying this company to run the public bug hunt program.
Or it could be a shell company for Mikrotik. Who knows?
No, the company is well known. It's been in the security and bug hunting world for a long time. Yeah.
Well, it also makes me wonder who's going to offer a higher bounty, various government organizations or this bug bounty program. I guess the bug bounty one is probably the more legitimate one to go with, but if they're offering you $100,000 and the US government says I'll give you 1.5 million, it's like, which one are you going to give it to?
The company, just because Dave asked, is Zeroday. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Zeroday? Zeroday? I don't know.
Like per diem, Zeroday? Anyway.
Yeah,
Thomas,
Zeroday.
Your brain works in very interesting ways. I'd go for the 1.5 million.
Now, what if it was, a hostile country? What if it was North Korea that was offering you the money?
Fuck yeah, I'd do it.
I was reading at one point that North Korea counterfeits more U.S. currency than any other country.
Shit.
Isn't that crazy?
What are they doing? Leaving the country with suitcases of American cash?
I guess I don't know how they launder it. Somehow they must.
It's got to be tricky because in every $100 bill, that stripe that says $100, it's actually made of metal. And $10,000 of $100 bills will set off, metal detectors if you go through the airports. Nice little trick to know. It's not there just to look pretty. It sets off metal detectors.
I'm sure if you're a government, you can get around it in some form or fashion.
Yeah.
And probably they are actually not bringing it in or out of the US.
It probably never comes here.
And not, it doesn't even go to US. You can just exchange it for a local currency or in a different country. You just do the usual forex scams and trades.
Yep.
All right. Well, we've hit the hour-and-a-half mark, which is normally 30 minutes longer than people can keep their eyes open. So do you guys have any closing things you want to talk about before we wrap it up? No? Bunch of head shaking.
Nope.
Good, because I got to go to the bathroom super bad. All right. Dave, if people want to get a hold of you out on the internet, how do they do that?
Get me, just email me, david@pennytone.com. I've received a couple of emails, some praises. Can't really say anything negative. I like the negative ones too, so if you guys want to send some negative hate mail, please, I'm all ears. I'd love to hear it.
Time to buy some domains and spin up some accounts.
All right.
Hammett's going to spam my inbox full of his stuff.
5,000 random Gmail accounts coming at you.
I'm going to subscribe you to every pro-Trump mailing list I can find.
Oh, yeah. MAGA.
All right. So, Mikey, if people were to get a hold of you on the internet, what's the best method for them to do that?
Patreon.com/TheBrothersWISP.
Oh, the Little Brothers with Slack. That really is the easiest way to get a hold of me now. Is just a DM on the Slack.
Because then I can defer to somebody else because I'm busy.
Well, I like it too. Yeah, if you're the expert and you can't get to it in 5 minutes, I bet somebody else will have some ideas. Well, somebody else's, so it's always good. Thomas, if people want to get a hold of you, how would they do that on the internet?
I suppose just Google my name. I'm fairly easy to find. There is, of course, always Unimus, so just Tomas at Unimus.net, and there is Slack. And
that's Unimus.net,
I'm easy
right?
to find. Yep.
All right. Cool. If you want to get a hold of me, Greg at gregsoul.com. Also, contact us at TheBrothersWISP.com. Facebook.com/BrothersWISP. That's Mikey's content that he puts up there. So thank you, Mike, again for that as always. If you guys have any questions or comments, or if you have 5 tips, send those to me. I still want to keep recording those things. Keep all that stuff coming at us. Let us know what you want to hear, what you don't want to hear. So, AKA Dave. Anytime you want to complain about Dave, you just send that to us. Anything else, guys? I think that's it, right? Thanks for listening.
Equipment and methodology, so sit back and start learning. Lighting up the tower so people can start searching. Shooting up the web in neighborhoods, net surfing. We got horrible jokes, we're loud and annoying, but we're informative facts, we're not disappointing. Just give us a listen, cause fun is the mission. I'm telling you, you don't know what you are missing. Ideas and some good comedy given. If you missed the show already, don't worry, you're forgiven.